Today I want to cover the next of the 5 A's, what I decided to call Asocial. And the exhibit A for me is the leave or absence management system in your firm. When I teach this class, I request one of the participants to pull up the absence management system from their organization. And so far 100% of the time the screen looks something like this. From date to date, the type of leave or absence and the reason why you are taking this. Now what is interesting about this is that when I joined the IT industry 32 years ago, I used to fill a paper form which looked exactly like this. Only thing is I had to get my manager's signature and send it to the HR department, and it gets recorded into my file. Now 32 years later, still we are looking at the same kind of screen. Why? What happened? The reason for this is that we in IT as system designers, I am guilty as charged, we simply converted paper based forms into screens, or Excel based forms or PDF or Word based forms over time into screens. And the technology also had limitations. For example, in my first job, I had to make a business case to request for increasing the main memory of the system from 2 megabytes to 4 megabytes. It's not a typo, it is from 2 to 4 megabytes. Right? That itself was hard. So we had to conserve CPU and memory and other resources, so we couldn't have a lot of processing power, which also prevented us from designing systems. So basically, with the asocial antifractal means that we are not taking advantage of the relationships within the data and between the users. For example, in this case, when I am applying for the leave, I could say, hey, 3 of your peers are also taking leave on the same day. Would you like to apply? Or instead of, I have seen the type of leave have a drop down of at least 20 different options. Why couldn't the system say, Sukumar, you are applying for leave, you typically apply for personal leave, would you like to take that? So that level of personalization is possible with today's technology, but it is not being done. Now as soon as I say this, someone in the class almost always says, hey, that is just the leave system, it's not a priority. That will be fine and dandy, but then I would argue that 80% of the screens in your IT systems in your firm have this kind of a problem, the asocial problem. There is one more of these asocial problems. The next one is that many of the applications in the IT systems were developed at different points in time, possibly by different people or different third-party applications, none of which talk to each other. In spite of years of talking about enterprise application integration, enterprise service bus, all that, we still haven't managed to integrate all the applications, which means they are operating as islands of automation. So the next problem is that we are not taking advantage of the relationships between applications and again between the users. So in the Cognizant IT department that I was the CIO of, we had this situation where you will go to the My Travel system and say, I want to travel from here to here, you're trying to book an air ticket. Then you go to the hotel or guest house system, again enter the same data from date to date. Go to the cab booking system and again say from date to date, airport, all that. And then go to the access card system to activate it in your target location, the same information. Because none of these systems were talking to each other. We simply created a shared profile data and shared it with all the apps, and we were able to integrate them. Now we found another interesting opportunity. We noticed that when people travel, multiple people travel to the same location, because the system is unaware of that, everybody will book their own cabs. So when executives come out of the airport, they see 10 cabs for 10 different people, most of them going to the same place. So using the system, the new My Travel system, we were able to see multiple people going to the same location, and we help them share the cabs, thereby reduce the expense for the company, as well as the eco footprint of the company was improved. So like this, you can look at the data between applications and the relationships and take advantage of it. Now, as I told you many times before, in the IT department, we had this idea of a 500% productivity gain and no change management. And I thought of this because I found that IT mostly goes for a 15 to 20% productivity gain at best. And if you're talking about a rollout across a large organization, hundreds of thousands of people, by the time the change management is done, you get probably negative gains. Right? So I felt that if you don't produce at least 500% productivity gain, you don't really have a business case for automating something because of the problems that it introduces. The capital appropriation request that I talked about a few episodes ago is a very good example of that. But then I had to convince my own team that it is possible to do a design something like this. And the best example I came up with then, which is still relevant to us, is this remarkable story of the CDDB. Now, those of you who are a little bit older might remember the days when we had to put in the audio CDs and rip it into this MP3 form before we put it into our iPod. Now, the first time you insert the CD, you will see something like this, track 1 through track 10 and its durations, because the actual name of the song and the composer, that information was never stored in the CD. Now that was a problem that the CDDB was trying to solve, and the designers figured out one very interesting observation, that they could concatenate the track number and the track length to create a unique signature for the CD. Now they would send that signature to the CDDB, which is available as a cloud-based service, to get the track information back, and that's how we were ripping our CDs. Now, what happens when the CD's signature is not in the CDDB? So, first time it is not there, we will enter it. But then they took our advantage of the asymmetry fractal, because most of us buy the popular CDs, because the music industry is hits driven, which means our CD collections are similar. So, someone in the community had already ripped that CD and only one has to rip it first time. And the information is available to everybody else. Thereby, the productivity gain for the people ripping the CDs is just incalculably high. 500% is actually nothing. So this is a great example of social design, you can say. But then, if you are looking at this presentation, you are thinking, what is the big deal here? Right? So how much would you pay for this service if you are going to buy CDDB? If you think about it for a minute, I fell out of my chair when I learned that CDDB was sold to Sony for $260 million. This is the power of innovation. Now, why it's $260 million? Because they also had extremely valuable data of all the CDs, how many times they were ripped across all types of musics and audio, even those that were not produced by Sony at all. So they had this extremely valuable piece of data, and that's why that amount of money was paid. So this is the power of doing social design and not succumbing to the asocial antifractal. So now in digital transformation, how is this relevant? I think 80% of our systems have these problems, which is what convinces me that we can do digital transformation in any IT system. So the first thing we can do is look at the important transactions and then transform only them, leave the others as is. Like the quick car example I gave you in the asymmetry episode. Between applications, I think RPA could be a good option so that the users don't have to key enter the same thing over and over. So you can build an RPA bot which will automatically transfer the data to other applications. That way you could do it. And with that, I thank you all for listening to my coverage of the asocial fractal.